All right, now we're going to go into the engine compartment. We're going to start off on the passenger side. Now, the reason we start off on the passenger side is we've broken down the engine compartment into 6 different sections. Section 1 would be the belt-driven parts. Belt-driven parts would be located on the passenger side of the vehicle. But first of all, let's go ahead and start off with our air filter. The air filter must be present, must not be dirty, must be clean, and not missing on the air filter. From the air filter, we're going to go ahead and move to our AC compressor. This is our AC compressor. We're going to check to make sure it's properly mounted, make sure it's not cracked, make sure it doesn't have any leaks, and it's belt driven. We're also going to check the electrical on it. The electrical would be this wire right here. Make sure that the electrical is properly mounted, that it's not cracked, missing, or broken. We're also going to check the condition of the belt. The belt, we're going to check to make sure it's not frayed. Frayed is when two pieces, like if it rubs against this piece of metal, if you start seeing the hair fibers coming out of the plastic belt. So if you see those hair fibers, that's considered frayed. Okay, so not frayed, and no more than 3/4 of an inch in place. So no more than how much?
3/4 of an inch.
Correct. From there, we're also going to check the hoses. The hoses cannot be frayed as well. No cuts and no leaks on the hoses from the AC compressor. All right. From there, we've completely checked the AC compressor, the electrical, the belts, and the hoses. From there, we're going to check our alternator. This is our alternator. We're going to check to make sure it's properly mounted, make sure it's not cracked or bent, make sure there's no visual damage on it, and no missing bolts. From there, we're also going to check the electrical wiring. The electrical wiring must be present, must not be loose, not missing, and no missing parts or bolts on the electrical as well. From there, it's also belt driven. We've already checked the belt with the AC compressor, so we're not going to check the belt again. You only have to check it once for each belt. So this belt runs 4 things. It runs the AC compressor, which is right here, the alternator, and it runs our fan, which is located right there. You can see the belt right there, where we can check to make sure that the fan is not cracked, that the blades are not bent or broken or missing, and no visual damage on the fan. ¿Verdad? From there, we're also going to check the water pump. The water pump is located right down here. Make sure that the water pump's not cracked, bent, broken, or missing, and no visual damage on the water pump. All right. No leaks and no missing parts or bolts on the water pump. Okay. From there, we're done with section 1. Section 1 would be all the belt-driven parts. There's 4 belt-driven parts, which are the AC compressor, the alternator, the fan, and the water pump. All right. Let's go ahead and move over to the gear-driven parts. The gear-driven parts on this vehicle, guys, is you have the air compressor. The air compressor is which makes air for your air tanks. Is gear-driven. So that one is the air compressor is gear-driven. It should be properly mounted, not cracked. No missing parts or bolts, and no leaks, because it creates air, right? So if there's a leak, then air would be leaking out of it. From there, we're also going to check the hoses on it. The hoses, make sure that they're not frayed, no cuts, and no leaks on the hoses on the air compressor. From there, we're also going to check the power steering pump. The power steering pump is located right in there. If you want to take a look in there. Okay. It's actually that part right there that you can see in the tip of my nail. That part is the power steering pump. The power steering pump should be properly mounted. It's also gear driven, should not be cracked or bent, no leaks, and no missing parts or bolts. All right. From there, we're also going to check the power steering fluid hoses. Make sure that the power steering fluid hoses are properly mounted, that they're not frayed, cuts, and no leaks on the hoses. Now, there's 2 kinds of hoses. There's a low pressure hose which has a clamp on it, right? And then there's a high pressure hose that has a fitting on it. High pressure hose, low pressure hose. Yeah? So you have 2 different kinds of hoses. The end is the low pressure and the high pressure. Okay. All right. What's the difference between this one and the other one? What is this?
The high pressure, the low pressure.
Because it has a clamp. Yeah. And a high pressure.
There's a fitting.
Correct. From there, we're also going to check the starter. The starter is located right in here. It's actually located. Está bien escondido ahí adentro. It's actually right down this way behind the fuel filter. All right. Aquí está adentro. The starter is should be properly mounted. It's also gear driven. Should not be cracked or bent or broken, and no missing parts or bolts. We're also going to check on the starter to make sure that there's no missing wires, that the wires are not frayed, cut, and no visual damage on the wires. And that's about it. So it doesn't have any fluid inside the starter, so you shouldn't check for any kind of leaks. But those are the 3 parts that are gear driven. All right, so we'll be back.